too general. What I'd have to
No,
like.
no, that was yeah, that was a good summary of Han, like what he's doing with the taking up the Foucauldian project of analyzing power, and I definitely one of his most unique ideas, and probably the most relevant to social theory and political theory, is the
Yeah.
idea of psychopolitical control, which is I don't know what the word would be, like nuanced, much more and much more effective as a
Yes.
mode of control, because you have this illusion of freedom. Now, I don't know. I'm just
Freedom's
gonna.
the linchpin of it. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you. Go
Yeah, yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Well, we can get into that because, well, one of the big, if we're gonna try to maybe turn this towards a Christian perspective, really
Hmm.
quick, one of the a really important idea in Christianity is the our understanding of freedom. And
Hmm.
it's not, we don't just have this universalist neoliberal freedom, right? And it's like
Hmm.
even in that verse, all the liberals like there's no man or woman, nor Jew nor Greek in Christ. It's like that's not a this is like there's freedom in this particular in Christ, right? Like
Right.
in the church, like it's not just a statement of universal freedom. And there is a sense, I think, like it, where we would understand this sort of freedom that neoliberalism has as actually a form of domination, of slavery to the passions,
Yeah.
to and I think Han is really good at that with his understanding of freedom as this actually a more subtle form of slavery, a more
Yeah.
subtle form of domination. So maybe you want to get into that.
Sure. What's funny about that is it's relevant because this is how I started on the what is Bronze Age privilege called, the intranuts, right? I was one of my essays was featured on the main page of this video artist called Nobody TM. That was like really one of the last true video art. It was a whole group of people, but I got to talk to the head editor, and this very became very popular in 4chan. And the most popular video of Nobody TM, you can look this up because there's archives on YouTube.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, the site was nuked because Nobody TM felt that the project was completed. Because I think the whole world became like a Nobody TM edit all the time. If you looked at one, you know what I mean. But it was this video. It was called You. And by the way, this is how I think E. Michael Jones got very popular. There's a video called You. It blew up around the chans where it was a video of like it was, he would make his own music and everything, but it was a video of these one of these like twerking classes, like all these white women
Hmm.
twerking. But over it was a lecture by E. Michael Jones, where he yeah, where he was talking about this it was a radio interview he did promoting his book Libido Dominandi,
Hmm.
which is essentially about that, how freedom is slavery. And he was talking about how um basically, if you go by the letters of St. Paul, even most major Western philosophers from Plato onward, the idea of unbounded freedom of the subject being a source of vice, being a source of one's own, what's that word they use in Revelation? There's damnation, but then there's the other one, Asian. Oh, what's it called? Um, Fruition or something? Yeah. Ruination. Yeah, yeah, basically.
Okay. Yeah,
In
yeah.
that, or something like that. I have to look up the exact term, but in a sense, one's own capacity for even Huxley said this, behavioral freedom leads to a sort of total ignorance of what you would say the true freedom of the soul is, which,
Hmm.
as we know, is not freedom in most Christian theology. I mean, judging by Catholic and Orthodox theology,
Hmm.
uh, freedom is something that is a necessary requirement because God has given us free will. But this is a requirement to follow the law, right?
Yeah.
That Christ fulfilled of that covenant, right? Through his supreme sacrifice, the ending of all other sacrifices, which we can get into how Byung-Chul Han also talks about Gerard in that regard.
Sure.
But nowadays we have what Byung-Chul Han calls entrepreneurial freedom, which is the freedom to make oneself. That Foucault, near the end of his life, when he died of the Salliform's disease of his own freedom, yeah, There you go. I'm as much as I love Foucault. Yes, I know he was a degenerate. Yeah. I understand the thing in Tunisia. We're not going to talk about it for
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah.
Okay, we're not talking about for YouTube. The thing that happened in Tunisia allegedly happened in Tunisia. Anyways, Foucault, thought that there was sort of a creation of the self through these acts of aesthetic comportment that one takes upon in your own life.
Mhm.
But then, then later people like Agamben would come up and say, well, Foucault, everything's about the orgy, everything's about this orgiastic expression of freedom and parrhesia, truth telling, the care of the self through its own artistic creation. But then Agamben's like, who cares? It's like, okay, yeah, we have one global universal. Him and Baudrillard both would say, yeah, we have one global universal orgy going on all the time, but it's like, are we really free?
Yeah.
Right. So, anyways, how this relates to E. Michael Jones, he gave a good example in this talk that was clipped up by Nobody TM, where he used the example of during the Intifada, and I believe it was 2002, because the one in Ramallah, because there was one in 2002, the one in 2006. I had a friend there actually who was in 2006. I went to school with, but it was conducted by that one particular nation in the Middle East that I'm kind of uncomfortable saying on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
But you know the one, right?
Yeah.
So essentially what they did when they entered into Ramallah is, and what they usually do, the IDF, what they usually do is they impose curfews, they restrict resources, they have allotments for foodstuffs, and they take out quite a few of the civilian infrastructure, just to put it lightly. But what they did was when they imposed a curfew on people, the first thing they did, the IDF did, was they took control of the radio and television stations. And what did they do with the television stations? They broadcasted pornography, right? All the time, 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they do this? Why would they do this psychological operation? And of course, E. Michael Jones, and let me preface this by saying that E. Michael Jones has some very controversial takes on those the particular group of people.
Yeah.
To remain nameless, but guessing which one.
We're not going to say what people they are.
Exactly, but you can guess.
Yeah.
But so I'm not. Listen, I don't condone. As Bap says, I'm liberal. But but anyways, he says that why did the IDF do this? It's because the constant bombardment of the sort of the pornographic image becomes in itself a form of demoralization, and it becomes in its own way a humiliation ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And that came from another far right figure who's part of a certain podcast network. His name's Borzi. He came up with that term, humiliation ritual. But it's funny though. But when you actually do analyze it, it's a testament to the whole thesis of libido dominandi, that essentially the sort of freedom that's provided to us by liberal modernity, and that's facilitated by the various techniques of the sort of post-Gutenberg galaxy, that in itself is a way of basically condemning the soul to an endless want and pursuit. And Byung-Chul Han, you were saying about how and other people have said this to me as well. One of it is another friend who's a podcaster. His name is a Digital Numina. He's like, Byung-Chul Han's a secret Christian thinker, right? I go, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But
then the more I read it, especially Burnout Society and Psychopolitics, you can easily see how what Byung-Chul Han calls the entrepreneurial self, that is essentially caught up in this boundless, ungirded, oceanic sense of freedom, that in itself is a form of condemnation of what you could experience as a true self. And so Byung-Chul Han, he does something that is very interesting when it comes to a lot of other Christian thinkers in general, and a lot of as much as you could say it's a boomer attitude, especially in Infocracy, his latest book, he makes it more explicit from Psychopolitics, where he talks about how there was this originary sort of sense of the self that was created mutually through the Habermasian notion of communicative rationality, communicative action, where discourse is freely given. Discourse is how we arrive at our own sense of self. But when he talks about digital rationality, when he talks about what he calls dataism, where data is the only predicate of worth, where your own self-creation is the only thing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly in a web of creating your own self without end. Then this disrupts what is the guarantor of the self, which is communicative rationality. And so in a way, Byung-Chul Han harkens back to a Christian notion of the self being one that is guaranteed by that sort of experience of being of the Imagio Dei, right? Of a higher creation. But this can only be been brought about from community, from sort of a certain grace that guarantees us our authenticity. But again, I don't want to say that Byung-Chul Han is like a crypto trad Christian or whatever. I'm just saying that we're doing an intellectual exercise of saying that how can one of the most, what I believe, one of the most prescient modern philosophers that is living today, how can he relate to something that is very much within apostolic Christianity in terms of tradition, in terms of how the sort of Christian, Christendom views the subject as something of an essential being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something that is being disrupted by very much the machinations of modernity. There's a lot of like, and of course, some of it does come off as like, Jordan Peterson boomer posting. Like, I mean, recently with Jordan Peterson, and you mentioned this in your recent video about, going off on anons, and here's the thing, like I use my real name and face, but, most of my friends are anons. Most of the people I interact with every day, like anonymity is sort of one of those very tricky subjects to broach because it's a necessity because of the apparatuses of power and discourse nowadays. But it's one of those things that, when we if we lived in based world, our enemies would have to be anon. Put it that way. But we don't live in base world. But base world could be within reach. But that's another topic for another time.